morning, everybody. Welcome back. Um, Hopefully, you had a chance to look at the project for Unit 3. I posted it on the announcement section. There was a video I made yesterday that went through it, um, what's expected of you, essentially. Some of you have already done it, which is fantastic, and thank you for doing that. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email them to me just so that I can know um, if it makes sense at all. Make sure you get that into me by Friday. Today we're going to start Unit 4. So we'll have a video today, tomorrow, and Friday for Unit 4. And then we'll just continue on and just do what we did for last unit. So there will be a project and there will be a written response. Kind of around the same sort of setup as before. And then we'll just move on to Unit 5 and then Unit 6 and then we'll be done. So today we are starting ultranationalism and the Second World War, or World War II. So this is the new booklet. So I don't think I may have given it to all of you. I don't remember. It was a long time ago now. But if I didn't give it to you, it is in on our D12 in the content section. Feel free to either print it out or just have it on the side and work on a Google Doc of the answers, or write them in, or copy it and make it write the answers right into the booklet. But we will continue on. So we're going to talk about and focus on the question today. It's on page 2. What is ultranationalism? And if you're following along in the presentations, which you have access to as well on our D12, don't forget that, even previous ones, you're going to notice that there's a black box in the top corner with a play button. That is Mr. Hendrickson. He is also teaching this section, so he has put in some extra notes for his class, and I don't see why it wouldn't. It would also. I don't see why you wouldn't, if you have any questions, we'll go watch his as well. Wow, that sounded really. I jumbled that part up a lot. It's okay though. Have a listen to what he is saying as well. Just don't break my heart and stop watching my YouTube videos, because I have a very fragile ego. What can I say? Anyways, enough about me. Let's get into what is ultranationalism. So we ended off with the First World War ending in 1918. The armistice is signed. And then the peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, is signed in 1919. So if you look at the map on slide 3, this is the interwar map of Europe. We call it interwar period because it's between two wars. But at that point in time, you wouldn't have known that because we weren't expecting a Second World War. Mind you, we should have when we look at the stipulations of the treaty. So this is what Europe looks like right now, or it did in 1920, let's say. So you can see Germany has been surgically altered. So we have the places in the west, Alsace-Lorraine, have gone back to France. That's why you can see that point come in to Germany. You can see the new countries of the east, Poland and Czechoslovakia especially, have taken chunks of Germany away. Some important things if you're looking on this map, if you see Poland, there is a green territory. That is known as East Prussia. That belongs to Germany. However, they had to make a strip of land for Poland to have access to the sea. So they separated two parts of Germany. So that green part is a part of Germany. You'll also notice there's a little bit of a change up in terms of the southern part of Europe. Austria-Hungary no longer exists. So we have Austria and we have Hungary now. And then we also see Serbia essentially kind of got its wish, and we have the creation of what's known as Yugoslavia. So it is now a kingdom, and it has united majority of the Baltic Slavic peoples into one nation. Romania has become quite large. We also see the creation of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia out of the old Russian Empire. And Russia no longer by name exists. We now call it the USSR or the Soviet Union. So this is how Europe looks now. Keep in mind that Europe right now is also it's broken. Economically, a lot of countries are struggling, and physically, geographically, some places are also suffering. So the terms that you're going to be introduced to today are ultranationalism, crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes. Those last three, they kind of all come together, and you usually hear them used in the same sentence. So, example, a genocide is an example of a war crime, and it's also a crime against humanity. So, we'll introduce those terms today, and then we'll continue using them throughout the course, or throughout this unit, especially. So, ultranationalism. We've introduced this idea, this concept before, but we're going to really dig into it because now we start to see it take root. So nationalism had many benefits to society. It brought people together and it created the sense of belonging that some people craved. People of the same nationality would come together, and this sense of being French or being Italian, it created the sense of community that they desired. Passionate leaders may inspire a sense of pride and passion into the nation. So even governments, political leaders would use nationalism, and they did use nationalism a lot during the First World War to get people to believe in their cause. So nationalism has always been a tool. However, when nationalism takes and it starts to go a little bit more to the extremes, that's when we get to ultranationalism. So ultranationalism is an extreme form of nationalism. And ultranationalists, they often believe fanatically that their country is superior to all. They have an undying loyalty to their country, and they're also hostile towards other countries. They see others as wanting what they have, and they see what they own and what then their culture, their territory, and we need to defend it at all costs. So this hostility starts to boil up, and when hostility just goes from being words to actions, you get war. So ultranationalism is what's going to lead us into the next conflict. So ultranationalism can easily lead to racism and develop an us versus them mentality. So like we said, if you're coming at it from a point of view where you see your race as superior, you're going to look at others and see them as inferior. So then that starts to build into this concept of racism. We'll see some sciences come up, some pseudoscience, so not a real science, but just this belief, this fake science will come up to try to justify these things. Eugenics, phrenology, these sort of things will come up, and they will be a huge part of the 20th century, so the 1900s and into even into now. So this us versus them mentality, again, it will create this sort of it'll start to set the stage for future conflicts, and we will see some conflicts that happen prior to the outbreak of the Second World War that kind of get the ball rolling a lot, and some figures who really play their role especially. So ultranationalism and crimes against humanity. So crimes against humanity is defined as a systematic attack on a civilian population. So it includes things like murder, enslavement, rape, torture, apartheid. Crimes against humanity can take many forms. So like we've talked about before, these words are used interchangeably. So they can take the form of a genocide. A genocide is the killing of a group of people based on national, ethnic, racial, or religious lines. So we have seen countless, unfortunately, genocides in the 20th century. So the first genocide of the 20th century happened in 1915 in Armenia, which is essentially the Ottoman Empire and Russia, so in that area. That was the first, and then we're going to see subsequent ones happen, unfortunately, throughout the 20th century. So then a war crime, These are willful killing, torture, or inhumane treatment against civilians or soldiers during a war, and they're violating rules that were set out in the Geneva Convention. So the Geneva Convention is essentially all the countries got together and they said, here, we're going to make rules when we go to war. There's some things that you can't do when we go to war. So really, it sounds kind of silly. If you think about it, they're kind of setting the ground rules for what's considered what's considered right and what's considered wrong when you're killing people. You see what I mean? So the Geneva Convention sets out rules on how armies are supposed to act against soldiers and against civilians. So when you don't do those things, those are considered war crimes, even though the ultimate war crime is the war itself. That was deep and introspective, so feel free to take that one. Anyways, so how does ultranationalism develop? So this question of how does nationalism go from being, pride in your nation and this sense of strength in unity to fanatical belief that your country is the best and all others are inferior and that they even should be killed. So one thing that really sparks it is an existing intense sense of nationalism. So for some people, nationalism is always there, but for others, it's there and then some. And then some is the dangerous part, because all it takes is one spark, and then some becomes the entirety of it, and it starts to corrupt the whole idea of nationalism. So countries facing a political, economic, or social crisis. So when times are tough and things are going crazy, the craziest people tend to make sense. So you're going to see that second point, that is a perfect example of what happens in Germany. So when we see the rise of ultranationalism in Germany through the Nazis, that's exactly what they are arguing about. They are facing a political, economic, and social crisis in Germany following World War I. We'll talk about it later in this video. But those three things are going to spark this ultranationalist cry for strength and unity. And ultimately, a charismatic leader who embodies ultranationalistic views. So we're going to introduce a few characters who are these charismatic leaders and who do embody this sense of ultranationalistic pride in their country. And the stage is set because a lot of countries are suffering after World War I. A lot of their economies are destroyed. A lot of their jobs their job markets are crashing because there's not any need for weapons anymore. So that whole industry has ceased. You're talking about millions of people who've lost their jobs. And all of a sudden now you have this individual who's talking about a greater future. And like I said before, when times are tough and someone's promising you something and you got nothing to lose, then we see leaders in these ultranationalistic settings take charge and lead their countries into essentially war. So the process leading to crimes against humanity. So it's not just a thing that just happens. It's a process. So it goes through a few points. So the restricted freedoms of speech. People will restrict the freedom of speech of certain groups. They'll demand identification. So when we're getting into us versus them, we need to know who's the us's and who's the them's. And the best way to do that is to create some sort of identification process. So one of the most famous ones is from Nazi Germany, where you have Jewish people having to wear the Star of David on their clothes at all times to know that who's a Jew and who's not a Jew. So that is probably one of the most famous ones. We'll also have the denial of education and employment. So based on your religious belief, your ethnicity, your nationality, you're going to be denied going to school, or you're going to be denied going to getting an education just because of that. So that's another step. You're going to restrict movement. So things like a curfew. So if it's 9 o'clock at night and we find you outside, it's jail or worse. You want to move? Well, no, you can't. You got to stay in a certain section of this city. And we're going to see as the Second World War, we go into it, the idea of ghettos start to come up. Probably one of the most famous ones is the Warsaw Ghetto, where millions of Jews are basically shoved into one district, fenced off, and made sure that they are staying in a certain space. And all of those things are all denying human rights. So all the human rights that we essentially adhere to and that we have on a daily basis, these are the things that are being taken away. So now let us focus our attention on three examples of ultranationalism, and probably three of the most obvious ones during this period. And then we'll go in depth on each of them, and then that'll be it for this video. So the first one we're going to focus on is Germany. So following World War I, Germany is a republic. For those of you that remember, Kaiser Wilhelm had to abdicate. That was one of the stipulations that Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States, said has to happen before peace will happen. The Kaiser needs to go. So the Kaiser is gone. And a republic is declared in the city of Weimar. That is why it is called the Weimar Republic. So it's a republic with the right to vote for members of parliament, but voters were not enough to form a successful government. So there's a lot of infighting now. There's different political parties that are springing up that are trying to gain control. Ultimately, it will land on the Social Democrats. They will be the ones that run Germany now. Then the Great Depression hits, and it hits Germany hard because Germany is already in a broken state. It has to pay back debts. It has a lot of its industry is being occupied by other countries, and it doesn't have enough of that resources to be sending out for trade and things like that. But then the Great Depression hits and nobody's buying anything because even the wealthier countries like the United States now, they are in a crisis because the stock markets have crashed. So Germany is in a economic crisis. Politically, it has no. It's a lot of infighting between a bunch of different parties, and there is also a social crisis going on in Germany as well. The social crisis is that, like in Russia, there are communists that want to take over Germany. So there is a revolution that is actually taking place in Germany following World War I. If you're interested in it, it's called the Spartacist Revolution. You can look it up. You'll be introduced to Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. These are some interesting characters in Germany. So there is a social crisis. And lo and behold, somebody comes up and says he has the answer. And he's the fella that is pictured here. So Germany is looking for a strong leader to pull it out of all those crises that it's going through. And Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazis, he basically starts off and says, hey, I can bring Germany out of this difficult time, and I can do this if you give me a chance. I know who's responsible for our downfall, and he'll focus his attention on blaming it on the Jewish people of Germany. So the Nazi Party begins to gain support after a failed attempt to take power. So the Nazis, essentially, they try to take control through a revolution, through a violent takeover. They fail. And Hitler will go to jail, where he'll write his book, Mein Kampf. And then he'll come out after serving time and then being let out early for good behavior. And then he will go about doing it a democratic way through elections. So he will do his speeches, and he was elected to lead Germany in 1933. And then he becomes what's known as the Chancellor. So there's a president, and then there is a Chancellor. He is second. Basically, he's second in command right now. But then there is the parliament in Germany is known as the Reichstag, and there's a fire there. And nobody knows how the fire started. They blame it on a Dutch communist who had mental, basically he was insane. But really, we can kind of, but we're kind of, historically we've pointed that it actually may have been the Nazis who do it, because after this, Hitler dissolves the parliament and declares the start of the Nazi Reich, or the Nazi empire, and makes himself the dictator. So in this small period of time, we've gone from Hitler springs himself up, he tries to start a revolution, he goes to jail, he comes out, he decides we're going to do this democratically, gets elected chancellor under a president, and then that president dies. There's the fire. He basically says everything, I'm just going to take over. And he basically becomes a dictator. And nobody really says anything because he's very popular. He's solving the problems that Germany has. So the state rules everything. The freedom of press, the freedom of assembly were suspended. Postal, telegraph, and telephone communications were no longer private. So that is essentially the start of Nazi Germany. If you're interested, I can give you some resources to go deeper into it. It's a very fascinating start, and looking at it from almost 90 years ahead, you can start to think, how could they think that way? Well, we can actually, we've researched it and we can see why and how. So that is Germany. Let's focus our attention now on Japan. So Japan, after World War One, got itself a nice little empire. It took some of the old colonies that belonged to Germany. So it was a former supporter of the Allies and was receiving trade benefits because it had been helping the British, the French, to fight the Germans. With the Depression, less and less Japanese goods were being imported. So there was a massive crop failure in 1932, and famine struck Japan. So we have an economic crisis. The Great Depression, Japanese goods are no longer being imported or exported. Benefits to these trade things are starting to be less and less because no one's trading. That's the Great Depression now. We have a social crisis now as well because there's a famine. People are starving. And then ultranationalists blame the country's politicians for the economic crisis. So now we have a political one. So we have a group of ultranationalists who are saying all of Japan's problems are on our politicians. They have failed us. They have failed us for this famine. They have failed our economy, and now we are starting to suffer. So they decide to take control, and they take control, and they will start by invading China for more territory. So they take over, they invade China, and it's seen as a success. So the ultranationalists now seen as a stroke of luck. They've brought prosperity to the empire. So a military government was established. Military leaders brought back traditional warrior values of obedience, and they create a culture that is focused around the emperor. So this cult is essentially established around the emperor. And the emperor at this time is this man here, Hirohito. He is, that's his picture. So again, like in Germany, we've had these forms of crisis. Charismatic leader is established in the emperor, and now we have this figure. For those of you that remember your grade 8 social studies, the Emperor of Japan is seen as a godlike figure because he's essentially the great grandson, or the great 1,000 or whatever many time grandson of the sun goddess Amaterasu. So he is considered a god in a sense, and they will act in that way too. Something that you may find interesting is that whenever Hirohito would leave his palace and he would be out in the streets, you couldn't look at him. If he was walking by and you happened to stare at him and one of his guards or secret police saw you, boom, you're in jail. That's how serious they were. So that's Japan, and we're going to see how Japan plays a part in the war to come. The third place we're going to focus on is Italy. So after World War I, Italy suffers the same sort of problems as Germany. they had switched sides, if you recall, in 1915 because they were promised land by the British. So if you are remembering on the map and the interwar period, Italy has that little part next to Yugoslavia. That part used to belong to Austria, and now it belongs to them because of what they've done for the British during the war and fighting for the Allies. So promising Italy power and prestige, Benito Mussolini, an extreme nationalist and gifted speaker, was appointed prime minister in 1922 and soon establishes a dictatorship. So what Mussolini does essentially is he was a captain in the army, and then he sees the problems in Italy. He sees the struggle with the economy. There are soldiers that are returning home, and they're not seen as a lot of heroes. Some of them are kind of brushed aside by society, and he sees that, and he's not too thrilled with that. The depression hits as well, and economic things start to hit Italy following the First World War. So Mussolini will take control, and he does so with his famous, what's known as the March on Rome. Him and his followers essentially are going to go to the Italian capital, go to the king at the time, and say, we want to take control. So in 1922, he is actually given the position of prime minister. It's not like it was a violent takeover. The king at the time, Vittorio Emanuele, says, okay, have a go. So he does kind of create this myth of this march on Rome, where him and his followers, they walk into the capital and they seize the government. Well, really, they took the train there, and they get there, and it's basically given to him. The job is given to him, so it's not like it's even this sort of violent takeover. He does, though, establish a dictatorship, and he does have this sort of secret police and this very authoritarian structure of government that is established. So Mussolini's policies include the suppression of all opposition. So there's no more political parties in Italy besides the fascists, and he instills absolute loyalty, and he has this desire to recreate the Roman Empire. These are the sort of things that he is telling the Italian people. Hey, this is my plan for Italy. We're going to recreate the glory of Rome. This is our birthright. This territory in the former territories belonging to the Roman Empire. These are ours, and I am going to claim them back. So when we continue, Mussolini is a little angry by lost territory that was promised after World War I, including control of independent country of Ethiopia. So if you're following along slide 13, Ethiopia is that gold country, essentially where Ethiopia is now. They were promised it, but it's not. It's still an independent country. So if you're looking at this map, the green, that is France, French territory, and that purple bits, the purple parts, so Libya and then Eritrea and in Somalia, those are Italian. So in 1935, Mussolini orders Italian troops to invade Ethiopia. So if you're looking on this map, you'll have troops coming from what's known as Italian Somaliland, from the south, and then from Eritrea in the north, and they're going to invade Ethiopia. If you remember, after World War I, we had the League of Nations established, so essentially the grandfather of the United Nations. And Italy is a part of it. So both Italy and Ethiopia were members of the League of Nations, and their emperor, Haile Selassie, that is the man pictured there, pleads for help in June. So the League calls for trade sanctions on Italy, but the United States, who isn't a part of the League of Nations, ignores them, and the British and the French were afraid. Mussolini would join forces with Germany and Japan. So essentially, they all sit on their hands and don't do anything. And then really what will happen too is the Italians will basically stand up and leave. They will say, we're out of here, this is a joke. And they invade Ethiopia, and they will take it over. So Ethiopia in 1935 will fall, 1936, they will fall to the Italians. Some things, when we talk about war crimes, this is probably one of the first ones. because when they invade Ethiopia, they invade it with heavy artillery, so tanks, airplanes, and they actually use chemical weapons against the Ethiopians. So it is one of the first war crimes that will be committed during the interwar period. So we have seen between the end of the First World War, we've seen two wars essentially happen: the Italian Abyssinian War, where Ethiopia is invaded, and then the invasion of China, or Manchuria as it's called back then, and the Japanese establishing a new country, essentially a new territory called Manchukuo, in northern China. So imagine South Korea, North Korea, and then the northern part of China becomes essentially it's called Manchukuo, and the Japanese will take over that. So when we look at this question of what is ultranationalism now, in the summary section, you should be writing that it is an extreme form of nationalism. I would really focus on how does it develop. So when we talked about this intense sense of nationalism, the problems of political, economic, and social crises that exist, and that charismatic leader. These are sort of things that you should be remembering. So look, and those three examples that we talked about, each of them had their charismatic leaders. They had their Adolf Hitler, they had their Mussolini, they had their Hirohito, and others. These sort of people, they embody this ultranationalist view, and most importantly is the crisis that these countries are going through. The end of the First World War saw political, economic, and social crises for every country. And that is why after World War I, you see a lot of more extreme governments forming. So we'll see the rise of Nazi Germany. We'll see the rise of fascist Italy. We'll see the rise of a military Japan. And we will see the rise of the Soviet Union as well. So these sort of governments, they spring up because the people are demanding this change and this sort of stability, and in that power vacuum, these people come up and they take control, and then they lead their countries down whatever path they go. So that's it for today. Tomorrow we'll do we'll do the next section. Continue working on the for those of you that haven't done it yet, the written response. Do the project, and then whenever you're finished, send me the booklet, Unit 3 booklet. I'm trying to be as lenient as I can with these sort of things. So really, if you send it to me, and it's got some pretty basic answers, I'm just gonna give you 100% on it. To be quite honest with you, I understand that these times are very difficult, and not being in class is probably making it more difficult for some of you. For some of you, probably enjoy this because you don't have to go to school, and you get to stay home and do online school. But continue working. If you have any questions, please either comment them or email me. I try my best to get back as soon as I can. And that's about it for today. I'll see you tomorrow.